Everyone, today we'll be going over the 2019 Invitational for UIL Science, and today's video will be going over the biology section. So before we get started, I'm just going to showcase you all the questions so you can do it beforehand before you see the answers. So these are questions from 1 to 9, 10 to 17, and the last 3 questions. Now I'll be showing you the answers to all the questions. Question 1 says, all organisms within the same order belong to the same of what? So if you remember the order of like taxonomy, it starts with domain, then kingdom, then phylum, then class, then order, then family, then genus, and then at the very bottom, species. So this is the most inclusive, that's the most exclusive. So meaning anything above order, for example, all the animals here would be sharing the same domain, same kingdom, same phylum, if they have the same order. So that does not mean they're sharing the same family, genus, species. So we can get rid of those 3. So the only option in this case would be A, the domain. Number 2, if an organism is homozygous recessive for a trait, which of the following is not a possible genotype of the organism's progeny? To answer this question, we'll quickly do a Punnett square. And we know homozygous, meaning they have the same alleles, and recessive, meaning they have the recessive alleles. That means the organism must have 2 recessive alleles. So that means each of the offspring will have a recessive allele. So it does not matter what the other 2 are, right? So this could be that, or this one could be recessive. Each offspring will have at least 1 recessive allele. So A cannot be true because that means, because the A is showing both with the dominant alleles. So A would be the answer for this question. For number 3, we're trying to find out where the light harvesting pigments of photosynthesis are found. So we know if the pigments are light harvesting, that means that the processes they're used in involve light. So in a chloroplast, let's make it green. In a chloroplast, we have 2 main parts. Well, outside the membrane. You have the pancake-like thylakoids, and you have the liquid called the stroma. So, yeah, just the liquid outside the thylakoids. So, we know the thylakoids are where the light-dependent reaction occur. Light-dependent, meaning the thylakoids need light. The stroma is where light-independent. Where light-independent reactions occur, which is when no light is needed for these to go. So if we know that light harvesting pigments are found, we're trying to find where they're found, that makes more sense if they're found in the areas that depend on light, meaning the thylakoid membranes. So everything else, nuclear membrane, this has nothing to do with photosynthesis at all. Endoplasmic reticulum, that's where proteins and sterols are made, nothing to do with photosynthesis. Same thing, plasma membrane, that's not anything to do with the chloroplast. And mitochondria does not involve light at all, it's not involved in photosynthesis. So simply the only option that even involves chloroplast to begin with, that also uses light, are the thylakoid membranes. For number 4, you're trying to find out which would you not find within the plasma membrane of cell. The plasma membrane, aka the cell membrane, basically its job, remember, is just to regulate transport, just keep the contents of the cell in, and basically ensure the right things are getting inside the cell or exiting the cell. So obviously it makes sense for transmembrane proteins, because those are the ones that regulate said transport. So it lets some things in, it lets other molecules out. Phospholipids are the main part of a plasma membrane. Integral proteins fall into transmembrane proteins. Selective permeability isn't like a molecule, but it is associated with the plasma membrane because selective permeability is essentially saying that some things are being let in while other things are being let out. So that these first three are not an option. Ribosomes are found in the endoplasmic reticulum, and they're found in the rough area. And they're responsible for making proteins, and we know that the cell membrane has nothing to do with making proteins. It can only export or import. So the correct answer to number 4 would be ribosomes. For number 5, it's talking about how it's asking which group of animals evolved after the dinosaurs went extinct 65.5 million years ago. So I'll give you guys a quick rundown of like the whole timeline. So at the very beginning, like after like the cyanobacteria and after like photosynthetic bacteria and cellular respiration bacteria started occurring, fish were like the more dominant animals at this time. After plants, of course. Like there's all at the very beginning there were like plants and all this were developing, but usually it was like all these aquatic vertebrates, I would say, like were developing at this time. And then as fish started to move towards land, we saw more amphibians. So now we're seeing with tail, they're losing their tails eventually and they're growing legs, and they're also losing their gills, developing lungs to take the oxygen in the air. Well, what do you think would have came next after amphibians? Well, first of all, we can also immediately cross out these two. After that, reptiles will be coming in after that because they share very similar characteristics to amphibians. 4 legs, mostly on land, but they do have lungs. And remember, reptiles, dinosaurs fall in that category. So it would also make no sense for reptiles to evolve after dinosaurs went extinct, when dinosaurs are a part of reptiles. So reptiles will be out. And once the dinosaurs went extinct, mammals heavily diversified. Like if you remember, guys, like the Ice Age, like that's when people started getting a lot more developed, and bipedal animals and all the Homo sapien, like all the homos, I think the Homo sapien, Homo erectus, all these mammals were starting to become very diverse. So the answer to number 5 would definitely be B. For number 6, which organism has no known function in the defense from microbial invaders? So we're talking fighting against microbial invaders. We can, as long as you know all these, this should be pretty straightforward. We can get the obvious out of the way. The immune system, their whole purpose is kind of to fight the microbial invaders. They contain the white blood cells, natural killer cells, T cells, all that stuff. The integumentary system, you wouldn't initially think of it, but your skin is a barrier for pathogens. Like pathogens have to cross your skin first before they get to any part of your body. So your skin is a very strong barrier. So that would be out. And lymphatic is slightly less common than the other two, but the main purpose of lymphatic is filtration. So it makes sure to remove the dead cells, and it has the fluid called lymph, which goes to lymph nodes to get filtered every time to ensure getting rid of all the waste products in your plasma. But if you guys heard of lymphocytes, those are cells in the lymphatic cell that are known for defending against microbial invaders. So that's out. Nervous system. The nervous system has no special defense against microbial invaders. It pretty much relies on the other 3. So if it can get kept past those, and if it attacks the nervous system, it has no defense. So answer number 6 would be D. For 7, you're asked to find the genotypic ratio of a monohybrid cross. So let's go over what do these words mean. A monohybrid cross basically is a cross between two heterozygous organisms. So let's just say, remember, heterozygous means you have one dominant allele, one recessive allele. And now you're asked to do a monohybrid cross between the two. So after we do the Punnett square crossing, we'll get that. We'll get these 4 different genotypes. And pay very close attention to genotype ratio, because if you were looking at the phenotype ratio, which is basically the trait, you would get a different answer. You would have gotten A. So read the question carefully. We have 1 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous recessive. So the answer to this one would be C. And if it's asking for phenotypic ratio, you would have gotten 3 dominant, and this one would be recessive. For number 8, which process specifically generates a protein's primary structure from mRNA? If we go through all these option choices, gene expression is basically just if a gene will be transcribed or not, and that's basically revolving DNA to RNA, and not necessarily the conversion of DNA to RNA, mainly just like if this will even occur. Translation is converting RNA to protein. So that would be the right answer. Let's just go over the other 3. Transcription is making an RNA template from DNA. So transcription is when you're going DNA to RNA. And gene expression regulates transcription. Replication is just like the name says, duplicating the number of DNA. So you're duplicating the DNA. And transformation, this is more of like a bacterial thing. It's when bacteria uptakes DNA from its environment. So all these option choices have nothing to do with, except B, they have nothing to do with generating a protein from an RNA. So the answer to number B would be B. Number 8 would be B. For 9, we're asked to find the order of the phases during the nuclear division portion of eukaryotic cells for somatic cells. So we know it's in a eukaryotic cell cycle, so it has nothing to do with binary fission, which is not really an option here. We know it's for somatic cells, so it's mitosis, right? Not meiosis. So you can get rid of any options that have these Roman numerals, so get rid of that. And that's the only one we can get rid of. Now we can also look at the fact that it's talking about nuclear division only. So we're not asked the whole cell cycle. This is only mitosis, so we can get rid of E, because E is talking about the entire cell cycle. Now it's simply memorizing what phase goes, what's the order of the phases. And for that, the answer would be D. The order of the phases goes like this: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. That's the mitosis part of the cell cycle. Technically, cytokinesis is after nuclear division. That's cytokinesis is the actual splitting of the cells, but in this case, D is the best option choice here. So the answer to 9 would be D. For 10, DNA replication domain bacteria occurs where? So we know it's a bacteria. So keep in mind, prokaryotes like bacteria, they do not have a nucleus. Make sure to keep that in mind here. So you can immediately get rid of A right there. Now, prior to mitosis, eukaryotes do not do mitosis. They do binary fission. Prokaryotes do not do mitosis. They do binary fission. So B's out. Immediately prior to cell division. Well, that does check out. The bacteria have to replicate their DNA and separate it And then once they divide, each of the daughter cells will have the same amount of DNA as initially. During gene expression, not necessarily. Gene expression in bacteria happens along with transcription. If you once you guys start learning about operons, as gene expression happens at the same time as transcription. And also technically translation, because in bacteria, transcription translation happen at the same time. So that D's out. And as for E, there is no double helix in bacterial DNA. Bacterial DNA is circular. It has just one circular loop, and the DNA is transcribed just like throughout, just one cycle. So there are no strands, it's all circular, unlike our linear DNA. So the answer to 10 would be 11. The field of biology that studies characteristics of organisms and attempts to classify them into specific groups. The answer to that one would be taxonomy. Taxonomy is the study of just classifying them. Like we mentioned, number 1, like the domain to species, that is what you'll learn when you're going to say when you're learning about taxonomy when you take your biology class. Everything else, like phylogeny, is just phylogeny, ecology. These aren't not talking about classifying them into specific groups. So the answer to number 11 would be E. For 12, consider the cell biology of eukaryotic cells. Which of the following statements is incorrect? Cell walls are present in all eukaryotes. Immediately, just from that alone, we can get this to be the answer, because we are eukaryotes and we don't have cell walls. So just on that alone, you can get it. But remember, eukaryotes consist of plants, animals, fungi, and protists. And among those, fungi and plants are the ones that have cell walls. I think some protists do, but a lot of protists I know do not have cell walls, and obviously animals do not have cell walls. So they cannot be present in all eukaryotes. And everything else is perfectly right. So the answer to 12. For number 13, this is one of the CDC questions that you'll be having every year. So for you guys, obviously, it'll be completely different timeline. You'll be having much more recent articles. So just for the sake of your informations, now you know that polio is the answer to this question, but just make sure, read the CDC, like whenever you're taking the exam, like maybe a couple articles. Like you don't have to go too in depth. Just note like mainly diseases. Obviously memorize diseases. What, like for example, in cucumbers, you know, salmonella is in it. Like memorize what disease going to what object. Try to keep in mind the dates, but that's obviously very difficult. Usually they don't throw that. They usually mention either the specific diseases, or they mention what the disease contaminates, like carrots, cucumbers, chicken, and all that stuff. So try to keep those in mind whenever you're answering this question. For 14, if a mutation occurred that changed a cytosine to an adenine in the DNA sequence, what would that be called? So if we're changing one base to another, we're just substituting that base. We're not adding a new one, we're not deleting a new one. So we can remove anything that can talk about adding or deleting bases. So deletion is what it says, the deletion of a base. Insertion is the insertion of a base. A frameshift mutation occurs because of a deletion or insertion. So all three of those do not have anything to do with swapping one base for another. And as for silent mutation, this is a type of mutation where if you change one base to another, but the amino acid produced does not change at all, that would be called a silent mutation. And our question does not really involve any amino acid that's being produced. It does not tell us if the amino acid has changed or not. So we can get rid of that. So the best option for 14 is C. Geographic area that can mate and produce fertility offspring are part of the same what? This is talking about the different classifications and organizations of life. It's separate from number 1, like the different taxonomic structures, because we're not talking about like how to classify animals. We're talking more of just like how to like or classify organisms. We're talking about how to separate like based on size complexity. So immediately we get rid of phylum because that's actually a taxonomic structure. And now we're talking about same geographic area that can mate. So mainly if they're able to mate, what does that mean? And they also have to be fertile offspring. So they have to mate and produce fertile offspring. So think of, for example, like any animal at the same like species. Would it make sense for animals at the same biosphere, which is basically Earth? Would it make sense for any two animal on planet Earth to mate? Can they produce fertile offspring? Can they even mate to begin with? No. You cannot make animal from, let's just say, a polar bear mate with a penguin. That makes no sense. Ecosystem. It's a little closer, but still, ecosystem is basically the abiotic and the biotic factors of a place. That also doesn't make sense because they'll have a vast number of species. A community is all the biotic factors in a place, but again, you're going to have many different animals in a community. A population is the right answer here. Populations are just all members of one like single species, and in a species, two members of a species can mate and produce fertile offspring. So the answer to 15 would be B, population. For number 16, we're asked to find the process of carrying water through plants and exiting the leaves as vapor in the atmosphere. We know condensation is the process of turning water vapor into droplets. Into water droplets. So that's not what it's talking about. Precipitation technically is just the rainfall. So it's basically like condensation, like once it turns into water droplets, it falls down. Infiltration, I don't know in a biological context what that would be talking about. Probably the infiltration of water into soil. Nothing related here. Evaporation is obviously turning water into vapor. The only option here would be correct is transpiration. Transpiration is how the leaves carry water through plants, and it involves like the tonicity of the plant, like how some parts of the plant is more like there's a lot of salt that brings the water up, and it also deals with like water pressure. So transpiration basically works because of the differences in water pressure in a plant. So that's essentially how plants can carry their water throughout themselves. For 17, according to natural selection, which would occur if a phenotype in 1 out of 100 organisms provided an advantage for acquiring food and reproducing? So we know if a trait provides an advantage for acquiring food and reproducing, or any advantage whatsoever, that organism will have a higher chance to survive long enough to reproduce compared to everyone else. So now it's only 1 out of 100, but eventually those organisms will start to thrive much better than everyone else. They will outcompete everyone else, and over time you will see this trait appear more often because these organisms are the ones that survive to reproduce. Animals that don't have this trait, they're more likely to die off, and their populations will dwindle. So the population of the animals with the phenotype will rise. That is essentially what natural selection is: the survival of the animals with the best traits to adapt to their environment. So A, organisms with that gene would die out. That is the opposite of what's happening. B, organisms with the phenotype would thrive and the allele would increase in population over time. That is what natural selection is supporting: the survival of organisms with the beneficial traits. C is incorrect because the beneficial trait will increase the population over time. D, again, that would actually align with C, so C and D can't one of them can't be right while the other's wrong. And E, I mean, you might think that way, but like over time, yes, as long as there are living members of those organisms, the population will slowly rise. So the answer to number 17 would be B. For 18, This is a disease question which changes like the topic every year. If I remember correctly, this year's disease is whooping cough. So I want you guys to do like a lot of research into whooping cough, like symptoms, like any important dates of like treatments. Just get along with, especially the pathology, like how it affects like different parts of our cells. Make sure to just note all that for whooping cough, as that will be very useful for the exam. And this year it was just, I'm assuming, just any a variety of diseases that you just have to identify. Just for if you guys are curious, the answer to this one is C, but I don't think you'll have any questions like this because the disease question is specific each year. For 19, the type of tissue found in the lining of the internal surface of the stomach is called what? Remember, any tissue that is lining something, any lining kind of tissue, including your skin, the internal of our stomach, around our trachea, inner trachea, around our lungs, any type of tissue that kind of lines some other organ is epithelial tissue. So that would be the answer. Muscle tissue is tempting, but that's actually the more of like the inner part of our stomach is muscle tissue, not the internal lining. And nervous tissue makes no sense because we do not have any nerves in the inside of our inside of our stomach. Connective tissue, it's pretty much anything that's not the other three, like blood, bone, fat, any cells like that. So the answer to this one would be D. And for the final question, 20. Large polymers made of amino acids that catalyze chemical reactions are called what? So we know if it's made of amino acids, it has to be protein, because proteins are the polymers of amino acids. We can get rid of ribozymes, which they have the same function as enzymes, but ribozymes are made of RNA. Inorganic catalysts, that is basically, I'm assuming that's any catalyst that is not carbon based. We know proteins, one of the main molecules involved in proteins is carbon, so C is out. Nucleic acid is out, and we're left with A or E. Which of these two are responsible for catalyzing chemical reactions? That would be A. Transmembrane proteins are more involved with transporting molecules in and out of the membrane. Well, enzymes are responsible for reducing the energy requirement of a reaction, essentially speeding up the reaction. So the answer to 20 would be A. And this concludes all 20 biology questions, and I really hope this video was helpful for y'all to explain why some questions are why the right answer is the right answer, why a certain wrong answer was incorrect. And feel free to post any questions you have in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them for you guys. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.